Welcome to all of you. We are going to talk a little bit more about the gospel as Chris has presented it to us in All Life Comes from Tenderness. But first, Josh has an offering for us. So, Josh, take it away.
Yeah. This is inspired in part both by the title and that Chris highlights that Jesus acts in tenderness, but also some of the sermons we're looking at tonight speak about a slow, patient work that God does in us.
What if I believed you when you said you wanna be around me? What if I could see that you've been here all along? And suddenly the story that I told myself is unraveling. The more I'm in your company, the less I am alone. Brick by brick, taking this wall apart. It took me years to build that fortress around my broken heart. But you're patient man, goes stone by stone. Pain can build a prison, but your love's making me a home. It's funny how your eyes adjust to living in the basement. You said that it might take some time to get used to the light. All those years of bracing for a bitter storm came and went, and I've been trying ever since to shake off the night. Brick by brick, taking this wall apart. It took me years to build that fortress around my broken heart. But you're patient man, goes stone by stone. Pain can build a prison, but your love's making me home. Every word out of your mouth is a truth I've never heard. Everything's different now, we've rearranged the furniture. I would rather be with you than hang around with anyone else. The more I'm spending time with you, the more I am myself. Brick by brick, taking this wall apart. It took me years to build that fortress around my broken heart. But you're patient man, goes stone by stone. Pain can build a prison, but your love's making me whole. Yeah, your love's making me whole. Yeah, your love's making me whole. Pain can build a prison, but your love's making me whole.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, man.
So, for folks who have the book, we're going to start in chapter 22. It's Chris's sermon entitled Humility, Humility, Humility. This is the name of God. Nice triune gesture there.
Yeah, I'm just stealing it from Augustine. I mean, that's That's pretty much a direct quote from him.
Oh, well, Williman just told me a couple weeks ago, like, we always preach with our friends, meaning we're always stealing from our
Yes.
friends. So,
Yes, you're right.
Chris, so before I'm going to ask two things. First, I want to know to what extent was kind of the craziness of COVID in 2020 in the background of this sermon. And then I'd like you to just walk us slowly through this, because I think it's an incredibly timely sermon, and I don't want to just talk about it. I'd like you to guide people through it.
Yeah. That's a great question about what lies behind it. It's been in years ago now, and I'm not entirely sure, but I do think all of these sermons in this collection are touched by that. Like, I'm sure someone who's a better reader of my work than I am could point that out. What made you come to that question? What in the sermon made you think about that circumstance?
The contrast. So you've kind of patiently you start with a saint. You quote Augustine at length. You're taking your time, but it's contrasted with on page 257. Some of us are swallowed up by this crowd or that one, consumed by conspiracies and online drama, ensnared in the mirror of self-reflexity. And then, at the end, you're giving us permission to accept what we cannot do. And you also comment too on the top of page 257 that you say, what I'm saying is that our successes and comforts have made it harder for us to live life as it comes to us, to reconcile ourselves with reality. And I think, I do think that's the way in which the pandemic broke our brains.
Yeah. So that's insightful. I think this sermon was written much more recently than that, but I think that experience is what kind of made that truth unmistakable or unavoidable. That all of us, there are too many inputs, there's too much noise, and that's coupled with having too many choices about things, so that we are kind of overwhelmed on two fronts at once somehow. And again, this is not original insight to me. Lots of people have pointed this out much more insightfully, but much more intelligibly. But on the one hand, there's too much bad news coming in, too much news, period, and almost all of it's bad. And we can't process that. And I don't just mean what we're watching on the news or what's showing up on our smartphones. I also mean all of the people in our lives that we love can reach us instantly with news about what's wrong with them. There's another sermon in this book somewhere where I talk about a woman named Alma Doring, who was a missionary, Mennonite missionary, and she writes about her time in East Africa in the early 1900s and how she was receiving mail from the US and the UK, but by the time it reached her, the news was very dated. So she found out about the death of her mother, for instance, I think 6 weeks or 8 weeks after it had happened, right? So if you can imagine the kind of turmoil that creates in a soul where you're so cut off from your other loved ones, and you have so few inputs that you get kind of a radical isolation. I think in a weird way, we have so much input, we have a similar isolation, but it's the isolation of too much rather than too little, right? Everyone we love can reach out to us at any time to let us know what's going wrong with them.
And expect you to respond just as
right. Yeah, and if those people we love are not very
I love
mature,
you, Mom.
yes. If they're not very mature and wise, then not by reaching out to us, they are putting a kind of pressure on us to respond. And so you've got kind of the stuff that isn't our business, we might say, the stuff that matters to us but isn't personal, and then we've got that personal access. So like that, I think we're kind of in a constant state of overwhelm. But we also live in a world in which we have a say over almost everything in our life that doesn't matter too much, right? Like if it's kind of relatively insignificant, I have endless choices about it. The more important it is, the less say I have, but I still have that pressure to do something. So I'm kind of overwhelmed, pressed to respond to things that are happening that are none of my business, things that matter to me but aren't personal, things that are very personal, and parents, kids, spouse, friends. And then I'm also at the same time under the illusion that if I just knew the right thing to buy, the right thing to read, the right person to ask, the right doctor to meet with, I could unlock what needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I think we all, virtually all of us, know that's not true, that's still what it feels like. And then our anxieties are up. And when our anxiety is up, we're not breathing, we're not thinking, we're reacting. And that can be a virtually impossible place from which to act wisely, to act with any kind of peace. And I think that's the condition most of the people I know live in. I think that's basically become normal. And I think the pandemic either created that or made it so that we couldn't look away from the reality of
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, I like what you say in the second half paragraph Jason highlighted. Almost despite us, we keep trying to force life to yield to our needs and wishes. As a result, we are increasingly desperate and in denial and often end up falling headlong into one kind of unreality or another. That idea that not just to have a hot take on everything, but that we need to act to shape life to our will, to come out the way we think it's supposed to.
Yeah. And I mean, think about, and we've talked about that a lot in our conversations over the last years about the pressure that's on the preacher or the pastor to have something to say, which I think it's understandable at a certain level, and it is an indication of something else that had gone wrong, which is there in a lot of our churches, the me having something to say about it isn't going to do anyone really much good. So I think, yeah, I think it's a tough place to be in. It's a tough place to live in. It's a tough place to do ministry, and it's a tough place to try to parent, to survive marriage or anything else. I mean, it's a tough situation. It really is. I think. No, I mean, yeah. I don't want to overstate or sound like I'm exaggerating our troubles, but I do think these are our troubles, and they are real. They're very real.
Chris, you've done a wonderful job in this collection of sermons of always holding the saints before us, and in this story in particular, you lift up the life of Saint Silouan the Athonite, and I'm wondering what you could share with those who haven't read the sermon, the role of pride and the role of trying to bend things to our will. How does he highlight that?
So before you get to this specific saint, Chris, related to what we were just talking about, if there are people listening or who will listen or watch, who want to have a cleanse from Christian influencers, and instead insult the Christian saints, where would you send them?
Well, I think the place to start is with the saints that are at the roots of the faith as you've come to receive it. So I think we want to be as in touch with our own story as we can be. So for me, that really started with early Pentecostal figures like William Seymour and others, then Wesleyan figures, including John and Charles themselves, and then who they were reading and who they were referencing. So I think you want it to be, now, the Spirit leads as the Spirit leads, and sometimes you just stumble into a saint that has seemingly no connection at all to your own faith story, but as it turns out, they do. I just think, though, if you're making the decision to start looking for someone, I would say start close to home. Who are the people that taught me the faith? Who are the people who the church has recognized as saints that influence this tradition that I received? What is that at its best? What is that at its most faithful? And then work from there to the larger church. And
Okay.
I think that's a way of kind of acknowledging. Well, it's a form of gratitude, a kind of a way of saying thanks to the women and men who gave us this faith. And I think one of the things we need desperately is to be as in touch with reality as possible. And the truth is all of us received a particular form of the faith. Now,
Mhm.
again, that's complicated by the fact that a lot of us, probably everyone watching this, has grown up in a time in which you have your local church or the church your parents attended or whatever it was, wherever it was that you first started to show up around the gathering, but you were also watching it and listening to it and reading all along the way. So there's a kind of diversification that I think is unparalleled historically, and that means you can have lots of debts on lots of fronts, as I do, but I still think there's some merit in how do I honor the saints that are closest to the mothers and fathers of my faith.
Okay. Okay. That's good. That's good. So yeah. So all right. Now that I've interrupted 3 times, let's start. Yeah, walk us through the sermon, starting with Saint Silouan.
So I had heard about he has it's from this text actually, which one of his disciples writes about. So we're not that far removed from his life, and the story is he's a young man. He comes to this monastery very early on. Silouan has some kind of mystical experience, a vision of Jesus, and he shares it with his teacher, his master, and his master is impressed with it. And for whatever reason, as he probably should have been, that's not a critique of the master, but it did lead to a kind of arrogance, a pride on Silouan's part, that he had such an incredible vision so early in his life as a monk. And then he has a very long stretch, years and years and years and years of kind of constant temptation. And it's out of that he ends up having an encounter first with this demon that comes between him and the Eucharist. And the demon asks to be worshipped, to be adored, and Silouan refuses, sits down, and asks once again to be delivered from these torments. And what he hears is, keep your mind in hell and do not despair.
Hmm.
That's the saying. I had heard it years and years before, but had never really gone and looked up what's the context for that saying. Yeah, there you go. Keep your mind in hell, but do not despair. Despair not. And so several years ago, I've kind of tried to make it a habit that anytime I hear a line like that sticks with me, never to share it with anyone until I've gone to see where did it come from.
Wow.
Now, some of that is just because I just don't want to embarrass myself by saying something and then someone asking me a follow-up question like, oh, what's that about? And I have nothing to say. Right. So some of it is just, again, pride on my part to make sure I know what I'm talking about. But some of it is, I think I wouldn't want anyone to do that to me, or at least I don't. I think there's something inhuman about isolating phrases like that. And so I've tried to make it a habit of, if something stands out to me, I want to go find, where did it live? Like what was its habitat? So I find it eventually in this book. I read it. I read this story. He has this vision. He hears this word from the Lord, keep your mind in hell and despair not. But the key in the vision, the word that he hears, is only the proud have demons.
Hmm.
Only the proud have demons. So what I'm starting with in this sermon is that what if the places of torment in our life, which again, I don't think I talk about this in the sermon. I'd have to look again, but I do think there's a difference between torment and suffering. Like we all suffer, but torments are something else, right? The places where there's a kind of menace to what we're suffering, and it feels as if we're under attack. And what he says about, or what he hears, that only the proud have demons. I mean, I remember when I first read it, I thought, well, that can't be true. But I think that the key is not only the proud are attacked by demons, but only the proud have demons stay around them.
Hmm.
Oh, and I think the way I would say it now is only the proud make room for the demons to stay. Like it's our pride that allows them to just keep showing up over and over again. So I don't think everything that's demonic or everything that's an affliction of evil is your own fault. But I do think that if I am arrogant and I live with pride, if I do not live with humility is a better way to say it, then I end up leaving room for the demonic to hang around, to find, as Paul will say, I leave room for the devil. And I made a switch right there that I think is a really important one, which is it's one thing to talk about being proud. It's much more important to talk about what it means to be humble. That when we're talking about pride, we just mean you're not being humble,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if we lose touch with that, it can get really tricky, like what we mean. But anyway, that's how the sermon begins, with kind of with that story and that truth that we leave room in our lives for ongoing affliction because of our lack of humility.
I mean, it's a good connection though, because as Herawa says, no humility without humiliation. There we have to be humbled.
Yes.
So there is something necessary about that recognition too.
Well, Chris, on 257, middle of the page, you said you were wondering if you do this in the sermon. The groundwork you lay for the sermon off of the Ephesians text is that this is spiritual warfare.
Yes.
But when you said a moment ago that the proud, I'm forgetting how you said it, but it's almost like rather than allowing the demons to pass, we engage and we can't. So you have this line: we're eaten up with anxiety, reactive rather than responsive, and sensitive, without being truly tender. In a word, we're touchy, easily hurt, difficult to reach. And I just that sense of reactivity rather than responsiveness, that why is this happening to me, and feeling like we have to do battle rather than Christ has the victory, living into humility in that sense.
Absolutely. And I think there's that sense of touchiness and reactivity. I think we can see it in other people, and we know how dangerous it feels. We can sometimes recognize it in ourselves, although we're usually not. We don't recognize it until someone else tells us, "Hey, whoa, what's going on? What are you doing?" But I do think that is the kind of result of torment. Like that's what it does to you. And when torment is prolonged, when it goes on and on and on and on, I think it does, in a weird way, it makes you hypersensitive to provocation, but insensitive to all that is good. So you can feel the lightest insult heavily, but any kind word fails to reach you. Right? That's what I'm trying to say with, we're hard to reach. And so I mean, I'm just speaking out of my own experience of having lived this, and also having witnessed it with other people, that we are there's some way in which the touchier I am, the harder it is for me to actually receive love and to believe that I am loved.
Yeah.
So from Saint Silouan, you move in the sermon to Elizabeth Baker. And one of the things I like about you is that, so for folks who don't know, Methodism through the Holy Spirit begat Pentecostalism. And we just kind of like lost all touch with you.
Threw us out on our ear, which is probably what you should have done. But
which I guess is probably how Catholics feel about Protestants. Like who?
Yeah.
I've never heard of this person before. But it shouldn't be that way. And so, yeah, so I'm assuming most people don't know who Elizabeth Baker is in the communion of saints. So introduce us to her.
Yeah, so she's kind of one of the founding figures of what's called the Latter Rain movement, which is distinct from classical Pentecostalism. I won't get too deep in the weeds, but she is a part of that broader Pentecostal awakening that we now sometimes will call the Pentecostal charismatic movement. And I mean, I am intentional about trying to bring, again, the mothers and fathers of the movement that shaped me into conversation with the mothers and fathers of the church. And that's not accidental. And it is a discipline I try to live by. You know, I want to see those connections and honor those connections because it's the truth of my faith. My faith is shaped by her as much, and in some ways more directly than it is by someone like Silouan.
And
And
it's ecumenically necessary,
Yeah.
given the state of global Christianity.
yeah, but I also do it because I think we need as many good counter witnesses as possible. Like we need people to look to that show an alternative. Like
Mhm.
you don't have to live like that. You don't have to think like that. You don't have to feel what you don't have to feel at the mercy of your feelings. Like the saints are showing us there are other ways of living. And I'm not saying that Elizabeth Baker was a saint, but she's pointing to what it is that the saints live when she says, you know, they let go and let God. Like that's the way that they live. And her point to the worrying, I love it. I mean, she says it so well. The reproduction of the Christ life is not done in an instant. He is patient with you. He wants you to be patient with yourself in all the unfinished work, which is still so evident in your life. So in evidence in your life. Are you one with God? All the rest is the Lord's work. The trouble is that you worry. Specifically, you worry about your standing with God, your relation to God. You just trust him and condemn yourself, that you resist his discipline because you know not what he is doing. But the Lord goes on rejoicing over you while he works away at you, and he wants you to learn the lesson of just being still in his hands.
That is not the exhortation I was told to expect from Pentecostal speakers.
Right. Well, and see, this is another reason to go and actually read and listen, because we don't know nearly as much as we think we know, right? Which is including about our own faith and the faith of others. And I think there's a place for just a kind of some aspect of humility is just curiosity. Like, what did you really mean? And I think so. Some of it is that I think there's a point too here about she's you know fragments of that quote could show up anytime on Instagram or in Hobby Lobby, that sense of like you need to be patient with yourself. But again, that idea in isolation from everything else she's saying is just it's a fragment of something beautiful, right? It's a chip
Mhm.
off of a diamond, and it's true enough on its own. But it's been, so if you, I don't know, the analogy that's coming to me is, if I have a family heirloom, a ring, a diamond ring, and somebody chips it, and they have a chip from that diamond, there is value to it. There is, and it's still going to matter to me, but it matters to me only in that I get it restored, if I can, back to
Mhm.
the ring itself, right? And I think that's so much, I mean, overwhelming majority of kind of pop cultural self-help pablum is they're fragments off of something that was once insightful, once true, but it's just been chipped away, separated, bought and sold, bought and sold, bought and sold, thrown away, picked up. And so by the time I'm hearing it, something like be patient with yourself, it's like, what in the world does that mean? Right. But here it means something. Like
Yeah.
here she's talking about it means something.
And I think this is so if folks read straight through your book, like that called attention to like one with the exception of like Stanley Hauerwas and Robert Jensen, who are teachers to you, all, most of the other people that you turn to for their testimony and witness are people whose witness has stood the test of time. They've either been martyred like Bonhoeffer, or there's enough passage of time that the saints, the church has recognized their sanctity. And that is different than what you're saying. It's like, so often on Instagram or social media, it's like a quote from someone like, well, I don't know who that person is really, and we mentioned, like Charlie Kirk the last time we were talking it. And it's hard to like, in like with all these inputs, and like just taking a snapshot out of someone, like it's, you're exemplifying a good practice of standing back and lifting up things that we can trust.
And yes, and I think that's worth stressing, Jason. I think part of the job of the pastor and the teacher, and therefore the preacher, is to have enough time in your life that you can do that work. I mean, not in any way like to draw attention to myself, but like obviously in order to know that, Elizabeth Baker said that, I had to read it, right? Which took some time because there was lots of other stuff I was reading that went by the side, like most of today, besides the normal life stuff that I had to do, was spent trying to track down something about Nicholas of Cusa. And I don't know when that, if ever, will show up in a sermon, but one of the things that has to mark our lives as men and women who are serving others is we have to have the time in our lives to track those things down so that when the time comes to draw on it, it's there to draw on, right? Like there's a lot of that I think has to be done, right? Every sermon should be just a slight glimpse into what has astonished you over your life of walking with God and walking with the saints, and you're sharing that. So if that's what comes through in a sermon, is that I'm sharing, I'm giving you just a little bit of what I've experienced in witnessing the saints, witness Jesus, then there's life there, and then it's not my life that right, like I really am passing on something that I received, and I think that's a good energy to pass.
That's like related to like what Stanley says, right? That like part of the act of gospeling is to just show people, like, look at all the stuff you get to believe.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm really interested too. I think is what was behind my weird chipped diamond ring analogy a moment ago, but I'm really interested in showing people how to integrate all of the pieces they see lying around them. That you not only do you get to know a lot of things, but there is a way for them to kind of hold together. And like, I think at some level, most of the stuff we're most deeply convinced about is at least half true. It just has to be reintegrated. Right? So if you hold something deeply, there's probably a reason you hold it deeply. And if it were rightly integrated with other truths and seen to be one truth in Jesus, then you would know why. Oh, that's why I was connected to that. And now there's a lot of stuff that we hold, I think, that we hold the wrong way, not just in the wrong spirit, but we have the wrong rationale for holding it. And that has to be undone. But the goal is not simply to undo what we have wrong or to show, how we're going about even the right things in the wrong way, but to show, hey, if you're drawn to something deeply, if something that forcefully moves you, there's a reason it's forcefully moving you, but you have to be able to see that in a way that integrates the truth you've seen with the larger truths of the gospel. And I don't think you can get that perspective without seeing how others of other times and places, the saints in particular, have spoken of it. Right. So like, if I'm going to talk about being patient with myself, I don't think I should trust that idea until I've heard the way a saint talks about it. But I would say the opposite is true. Opposite is also true. If I want to talk about how I need to be difficult on myself, how I just need to grow up and do what needs to be done. If I want to have that kind of tough talk with myself, okay, let me look at a saint who's done that well.
Mhm.
Show me a saint doing that, and then show me 3 or 4 or 5 others from different times and places, and I'll start to see a pattern emerging. Okay, this is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. And now I have a measure to tell whether or not what I'm doing actually is whole, actually is faithful.
Yeah.
Do you
The
mention?
elements of grace.
Yeah. So speaking of saints, your next move in this sermon is to quote Saint Augustine in a sermon on Psalm 83. So unpack for us how you think Augustine's important here in the move you do.
So Augustine is someone I read a lot. I have a really, I don't know if contentious relationship is, but something like a contentious relationship. There are times in which, I'm deeply, deeply, deeply moved by it because you can tell that he's deeply moved. Sometimes it's kind of infuriating or puzzling. The way you can see him getting carried away with himself at times. I do think the older he gets, the more you start to see a kind of bitterness settle into him too, which is easy
Just
to
like
see.
Luther.
Absolutely. But there are moments in his sermons that you get a glimpse of what makes him a saint.
Mhm.
And like you see, okay, that's, it's he's standing in just the right light, and you realize, okay, that's what's stirring in him. And he's talking in what I'm quoting here about the ways in which there's so many who are arrogant in the church. But of course, if you know his story, that's who he was. That's how he came to be converted. And it's why his conversion had to happen the way that it did. And so when you're reading this sermon, you don't hear someone railing against the arrogant, unknowingly arrogant themselves, which is what often happens when we're preaching against something. We're just mirroring that energy, right? We're just mirroring that same sin and unaware of it. But you can feel in this sermon that this is someone who was proud, has learned the humility of the Lord, has been awed by that humility, and now grieves for those who haven't seen it yet. Right?
Yeah.
You can feel that in this sermon. Now, there's
Those are the influencers we need.
yes, Lord, give us those people, absolutely. And so that's when he comes to, where I come to this, which is the line. He says, you need to come running to the valley of weeping, where Christ continues to agonize, interceding for us and for the life of the world. So this sense of come running to the valley of weeping, like this is where you're going to find the tenderness that is going to bring new life, and it's the sign that your pride has been broken. Like humility is going to spring forth when the proud come to tears. And what he wants, though, and this is my what I'm trying to say about him, he doesn't just want the proud to come to tears because they've been humiliated. Right? And if in my anger, if I'm touchy and you're arrogant with me, then I want you to come to tears, but I want you to come to tears because you are broken. Because either I break you or someone else does, and in your humiliation you're ashamed. But what he's saying in this sermon is, I want you to come to the tears of Christ for you. Come to the tears that Peter has when his eyes and Jesus' eyes meet. And that's what I mean by this is a man whose heart has been humbled, not just by his failure, which in itself is not going to humble you anyway, but by his encounter with the humility of God. And that's why he says, humility, humility, humility is the name of God. It is the virtue that matters more than any other virtue.
So Dennis here says Augustine often veered mystical. How do you keep contemplation Christ-centered without drifting into vague spirituality?
Yeah, I don't think Augustine was ever vague, although I hear the question. I think you have to keep your eye on Jesus, quite literally, and read the gospel, read the gospels, read the scriptures in light of the gospels, in light of Jesus' life and death, icons, the lives of the saints. I mean, this is where the focus should be, and I think often is. Like, I think Augustine gets a bit of a bad rap on that point, so I'll defend him a little bit. But I think it's an important question, right? Like, vague spirituality doesn't help anyone. Like, vague spirituality is, a tragedy. It's a tragedy.
How
But
do you feel about labyrinths?
what's that?
I'm just joking.
I didn't hear the question. It broke up on me.
How do you
It's
feel about
somewhere where Jason is quite humble yet.
Okay, well, I absolve you anyway.
labyrinths?
But then, like, this notion that humility is everything. Humility is everything. Like, and I don't quote it here. I don't quote it in this sermon, but I do quote Jensen, whom you mentioned a moment ago, and I do want to come to that in a moment. But Ronner has this really, really important insight about what humility is. And he starts by saying it's an awareness of the fact that we're not God. That's how it begins. Humility begins in this awareness that I'm not God and I'm far from being God. Not only that, I'm far from being the human I'm meant to be. So, like, that's he says that's kind of where humility begins, with that awareness. But then it extends into an acceptance of that reality. So humility begins with, I'm not God. I'm never going to be God. I'm not even really myself. Not yet. But then humility isn't just that awareness, because that could lead to despair. Like, that kind of awareness could overwhelm you. But it's to have that awareness with glad acceptance.
Yeah.
This happened to me just the other day, and I owe it to Cherith B. Nordling. She was teaching in our open table class about 1 Corinthians 3, and she was pointing out what Paul was saying about himself and Apollos and Peter. Was I crucified for you? Like, all of that. Like, we're field hands. And so I'm online, and I'm looking for something, and I see an influencer that I know, someone I know, get referenced, and something in me sparked. There was an annoyance, like, why are people listening to this person? Like, that's what came up in me.
Oh, it comes up with me all the time. Yeah.
Like, and it was, I mean, it's not someone I know well, but it's someone that I know well enough that it felt personal, right? So there's some people I'm wondering, why are they listening to them? But it's all so distant, doesn't feel real. But this is someone that that shouldn't have been my first feeling or thought. And and none of this was like, all of this just happened in me kind of in succession. I see it. I'm not looking for it. I just happen to see it. I have this response, this kind of flash of annoyance, like, why is someone listening to them like that? Why are they given that kind of weight? And then instantly, I was taken back to what Cherith had said about 1 Corinthians 3 and what Paul was saying about himself and Apollos and the others. And I suddenly had this prayer come up in me, which was, God, it's your field. It's your seed. It's your planting. It's your harvest. These are your hands. And I'm glad they're not mine. And it was this kind of like instant feeling of incredible relief. I don't have to manage that. That's not mine to handle. Now, that's maybe the only time in my life that there's been any humility, but that was just a little bit of humility, right? Like, I was having this recognition of, I'm not God, and I'm glad I'm not God. Thank God I'm not God. I don't have to worry about that. Like, that's literally nothing to do with me.
Yeah, and maybe I already mentioned it last week, but so I was in Iowa 2 weeks ago for the Iowa Preachers Project. It's this grant thing that we're doing, and it's like 24 preachers from across denominations, a lot of Lutherans though, and over lunch, this one Lutheran woman, she's like zeroes in on me, and she's like, "So sanctification, what's the deal?" Like it's a unicorn, and
I love
and
it.
and but what you just described is that.
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
I think what people think it is in terms of like, well, here's your to-do list. These are the things you have to do to follow Jesus and be enough. Versus like just being present to what God's doing around you and how it's calling out what it's calling out in you.
Yes, and it is that. It was called out in me. None of that, like, that happened in me. All of that. Like, the annoyance, the awareness of the annoyance, the sense of guilt at the annoyance, all of it already shot through with relief. All of that just came up in me. And I think that if I have any part in it, it's just cooperating with what that means. Like, after the
Mhm.
fact, sharing that with others, especially those who are helping guide me and shepherd me, to say, here's what I see happening. Now how do I cooperate with that? But you know, I I think we tend to think of humility, I think, as a kind of stable state that
Mm.
is, well, I should say, when I say we, I mean those of us who've been shaped in kind of pietist and holiness circles. Uh, like that to be humble is to have, it's a stable state, like you're kind of constantly there, and you're essentially indifferent to anything anybody does to you. And I think that's completely wrong. I think that's utterly wrong. Like, humility is not uh, a state of indifference. It's a state of attunement to the good, attunement to God, and to what's happening in the world. That's more or less the opposite of indifference, right? So I
Mhm.
think we've really misconstrued what humility is and what pride is, because of that. So this is a tricky sermon in that we all use those words all the time, not entirely senselessly, but I think without real insight into how pride and humility are at work in our lives. And I mean, I ran into this, not to be too transparent, but I ran into this just the other day with my, it's pride talking to you. And I realized instantly that was a mistake to say it that way to him,
Mhm.
because in his mind, right, he thinks he knows what pride is, which is a certain way of presenting yourself to other people. It's more about polite
Mhm.
um, self-presentation, and like whether or not you think of yourself a certain way or not, whether you talk about yourself a certain way. And I was speaking about it, you know, I meant something entirely different, but I couldn't. It took a lot of time to kind of say, wait a minute, let me back off that. I don't mean it the way you're hearing it yet. I do think that this is pride, but it's not what you think. I'm not saying what you think I'm saying yet. And so I think we have to be careful about it. And this is why I said earlier in our conversation, I think it's much more helpful to start with, this is what humility is, and
Yeah.
then work from there to what pride is.
And like listening to you talk, it occurs to me that if we think these things are stable attributes of people,
Yeah.
we're setting ourselves up to either be disappointed in people all the time, or be taken advantage of by people
Yeah.
all the time.
So,
Um,
exploited. Yeah, that's right. Which is part of what, why I'm this whole chapter is a chapter on spiritual warfare. I think we are in battle. We are in conflict with the world, the flesh, and the devil. And the that the only thing that really prepares us to do that battling well is humility. It's that
So,
virtue.
and Josh, don't be shy about talking about why you wanted to talk about this sermon. But you said you wanted to talk about Jensen, and I saw Maylee earlier. Wanted to know why the further someone goes in their the life of faith, um, the trials and temptations of the enemy don't abate. So why is that? But so yeah, here's your chance to talk about the devil, and Josh, your resonance with this sermon.
Well, I was just going to say, building off of what you just said, of course, this specific sermon isn't about Christ's temptation in the wilderness, but a line from this sermon is the devil often speaks even with the voice of God. And I wonder, Chris, to close out our time together, if you could talk for a minute about discerning. It's an old, I think, understood truth that the devil quotes scripture all the time, but the difference in Christ's response and humiliation and the devil using scripture as a temptation. How do we, what would you say to discerning those spirits?
Well, usually it's not that hard to discern if we're fully awake and aware. But it's rare that we're fully awake and aware. And so anything I'm going to say, it's going to look and feel different when you're inside the experience, right? Like when you are overwhelmed, when you are anxious, when you feel violated or feel attacked, then it's really, really, really hard to tell up from down. And this is one of the reasons I think we have to have the saints as points of anchoring. Where this is why I was saying earlier, I need to be able to see that in the life of someone else. And so I need to be able to, and of course, some of that is I need flesh and blood people around me whose names I know, whom I can reach out to for help. But I also need the saints gathered around me, not just praying for me, but to know their stories well enough to recognize this is what it looks like in their lives. And I need all of that to kind of orient. And I don't think there is any kind of formula for how you discern. I think that any attempt you would make to formalize it, you would leave something out. Like how did Jesus know when Satan is saying, in the wilderness when he's quoting Psalm 91 to him? How does he know? I don't think that's formulaic. I think it's a recognition of what's playing out right here, right now. I think you could quote that exact line from Psalm 91 some other time to someone else, and it wouldn't be satanic, right? And I think we have to be wary of thinking it's going to be easier than it is to tell someone else how to discern it when they're inside their moment of trial or temptation. But
Because
I
it's
think
important that like 40 days are distilled into a few verses.
yes, absolutely right. Yeah, and it's we often miss this in the way we read the temptations. We're being told the essence of the temptation, not the way the temptation played out. Like we're not given any description of how that temptation actually arose for Jesus, right? We're just simply told what it was, not how it came. And so we have no idea, but it was genuinely an ordeal for him. Now, I don't think it was an ordeal in the sense that he was conflicted, because I don't think Jesus is at odds with himself in the ways that we are with ourselves. But I think that's the clue. If you are inside of a temptation or you're inside of a trial, I think the key is humility is not simply it's got nothing to do with thinking badly of yourself or trying to own your failure. It's way more than that. It's more than just saying, I'm not God, I've failed here. like what happens with Job, for instance,
Mhm.
when he throws himself on his face and says, I've heard about you with the years. Now I've seen you with my eyes, and
Yep.
I abhor myself. That's not humility. That's just there's a kind of recognition, but it's not yet humility, and it's why I think the Lord does not answer him.
Mhm.
There's no response from
Yeah.
God that says, "Oh, you're forgiven," right? Don't be afraid, because over and over in Scripture, when you see those moments when someone throws themselves at the feet of Jesus or at the feet of the angel of the Lord, there's this, stand on your feet, don't be afraid, and that doesn't happen here with Job, and I think it's because his fear is not really fear of the Lord; it's fear of what he fears of the Lord.
Mhm.
Still, and remarkably, what God does instead is speak to the friend.
Mhm.
Say, you go to Job and you let him know that I've told you he has spoken rightly about me and you have not. And I want him to pray for you. And what actually brings humility to Job, right, is the interaction from his neighbor, from those friends. And
Who've
and
been
his
humbled.
willingness, yeah, exactly. And his willingness to pray for them, that's his humility. That's his humility. And so, like, I would say to people, like, if you're in a time of temptation and trial, it's probably not it God does not need you to own how small you are, right?
Mhm.
You are small and you need to own it so that you don't try to take on too much. But God doesn't need you to he doesn't need to cow you or to make you cower. What he needs is for you to understand exactly how you are to relate to these neighbors, these friends around you. And I think that, like, that's reality. That's putting him back in touch. And that's the key, right? That's the goal, is to put us back in touch with what's real, where we're not touchy. We're reachable, and we're we're within reach for people again.
And that, before we started recording, I mentioned that I had been listening to your conversation about resurrection. That it's Jesus's whole life that is resurrected.
Yeah.
That yeah, and so it's God doesn't need us to be made small. It's rather that you know Jesus's life is returning to all things. And this is the life that God wants for you.
Yeah. I'm going to read this bit from Ronner, but let me say this again. We are small. We are weak. But God never needs to intimidate us into a feeling of smallness, right? Like, and in order to make himself big, like that. And that's what actually the point of the whole story in Job is that that's not what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So if you go back to Job 9, I think it's Job 21, Job has already said, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to confront God. God's going to respond by being God, and I'm not God, and I'm going to cower and say that I'm sorry, even though I'm not sorry. I'm going to repent, even though I did nothing wrong. And that's exactly what he does. But God doesn't keep playing by those rules. God does something else that Job does not expect. And I think that we are small,
Hmm.
we are weak, we are sinful, but God does not need to show his glory by our shame, right? He's not browbeating us. The goal is to kind of to be in touch with my smallness in a way that I'm at peace with it.
Mhm.
I don't know if I mentioned this last week. If it was this call or a different one, but so if I'm repeating myself, forgive me. But uh, my daughter Zoe and I were talking about a class she's taking, the Sufi mystics class. Did we talk about this?
I've heard you talk about it.
I can't remember where I've talked about it. Sorry about that. I'm talking too much, obviously, when I can't remember where I said something. But essentially, Zoe's the one who brought this to my attention, that you kind of have these two Sufi mystics. One of them claims to never have known God as he should, and the other one who says, I'm so filled up with God, I am God. And the so the story is reflecting on how could both of these be prophets? Like, how could you have prophets who say opposing things? And the reconciliation was, well, one was a sea and the other was a cup. One was a sea that is never full. The other was a cup that was easily overflowing. And when she
Hmm.
shared that story with me, instantly, what I felt was, I want to be the cup.
Yeah.
I want to be the cup. And I think that what we have to recognize is that we are small, right? Like we are, all of us, weaker and more vulnerable and limited than we're at peace with, than we know, or than we're at peace with. God's goal is not to make us feel small, but to make us be at peace with our smallness, with our
Yeah.
weakness, and humility would be there. Listen to this. What Ronner says. Humility is the disposition of the human being who, conscious of his radical distance from God, who is perfect, has gratefully and courageously taken to himself God's self-examination in the Son, and the transformation and elevation therein revealed of the little and weak of this world into the great of the kingdom of God. This humble self-acceptance is expressed particularly in the acceptance, forgiveness, and endurance of the weakness of one's fellow man, and in the readiness to serve him and God. Like that,
Hmm.
I think that's perfect. Like that's perfectly said. And to do that is to make it so that the devil doesn't really have access to us. Like, and the demons won't stay around. To go back to where we began, if I know how to be small in the right way, not to feel belittled, but to be at peace with my lowliness in the way that Mary is, like in her song, like she rejoices that God has looked upon her lowliness. If I can be at peace with that, then there's just not enough room in my life for the devils to stay.
Yeah.
And now there's no torment.
Mm. Y'all ever
It's
heard
really good.
the story of Nadia Bolz-Weber talks about kind of clash of culture that were showing up at one of the places she served, one of the churches she served. And she got to the point where she was intentionally leading with grace and saying, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when I or somebody from the congregation will disappoint you. But I hope you stick around on the other side of that to see the beauty of grace. And I think what she's gesturing at is that going through it and being okay with your smallness and being in community and not having your way and throwing your weight around or being touchy because things don't meet your expectation, but to be okay with the disappointment and just to discover a bounty on the other side that you didn't know was possible.
Yeah, and that's to Ronner's point about enduring the fellow. Like this is one of those places where, like, to put some tough talk into this, like we are much too easily offended by other people. We are much too touchy. And there is a part of this that is we got to get over ourselves some. Like we got to, like, what do you expect? Like and I don't want to, again, I don't want to belittle anyone, and I don't want to belittle anyone's pain, but I do want to put it in perspective, my own and others. And the truth is, most of our pain is small because we're small. And a
Mm.
lot of what we're feeling is petty. It is petty. And
Mhm.
we just don't live in a moment where that comes back to us the right way. We have, on the one hand, we have a whole class of people that we have hired to reflect back to us what we want to hear. Thankfully, not the best of them don't do that, but there's a whole industry of people who are paid to tell us what we want to hear. And then we've got a lot of other people in our life who are so upset about what's going on in their life that they're just annoyed by anything we say that isn't praise of them. So we, on the one hand, we've got a kind of sycophantish mirroring and constant irritation flowing at us. And nobody can live with that. I can't live with wondering who's going to tell me the truth in my life. I don't need someone to yell at me, but I also do not want somebody who just says back to me how right I am. Like yeah, you get the point there. I mean, I know we're we're out of time.
Oh,
But I think
I mean,
humility.
you mentioned. I mean, like you mentioned, like the temptation of Jesus. Like it's just something I keep coming back to like of late. Like he's in the wilderness for 40 days. Like, I think we think of the ministry of Jesus happening fast in a compressed
Yeah.
time, but like within that time, like there's a whole lot of time. Like nothing happens very fast.
Not even really the passion. I mean, the telling of it in the Gospels indicates that, right? Like, so the way that those months or years leading up to the Passion Week, the time that takes to tell in the Gospels, then we get to the what we call Palm Sunday and all that's going to follow that week. We get a lot more detail about that week, but even still, there's a lot. We couldn't do a moment by moment. What was Jesus doing and thinking
Mhm.
from the time he cleansed the temple to the time that he appeared to the disciples in that locked room? Like,
Yeah,
but
you could do a
that's
whole
not how
year-long
God
sermon
works.
series just on that. Like, yeah, it's a whole and the texts are teaching us patience.
Yeah, and some of that is, you know, we've talked a lot about littleness and smallness, but I also think that's always a relative idea. Little compared to what? So little, yes, compared to God, obviously, but actually, that's the beginning of the insight that God doesn't have a size, right? All
Hmm.
sizes are God's sizes, but time has a size. And I'm little compared to that. I'm little
Mm.
compared to the world in which I'm situated. I'm little compared to what my own life is, right? Like, I'm little compared to the influence I'm going to have. Like, this is part of the shock and horror, but also wonder of being a pastor or a parent or a spouse or a child, which we all are in one way or another. We are, all of us, we have outsized influence given who we actually are. And
And also,
that's
like,
where humility.
like to go back to resurrection, like who you are right now is just a fraction of who you will
Absolutely.
be
Yes.
in resurrection.
Yes. So that's part of, again, what's so great about what Ronner says. God works with the lowly, God works with the weak and makes them great in the kingdom. And we don't really have much sense of that. And this, Maximus's notion that we're all in the womb right now. No, and John Bear, of course, has drawn our attention to this in all kinds of ways, but none of us are really alive yet. And we don't know who we are, which is, I love that image in Revelation of those that overcome will be given a stone, and in that stone is a name written that no one knows, right? Like that you don't even know your name yet. And we'll see who you're going to become. You're still in the womb now. You're still being formed. And these events are contractions, right? They're moments in which you are being formed for whomever you're going to be.
Well, Chris, I thank you for your time. Thank you for the book.
Thank you.
I hope you are not raptured soon, so we can
I have
continue the
no worries
conversation.
about that. I don't think there's going to be a rapture. I'd bet a lot of money on it. I won't be going in it because, look, if it happens, I've already gone on record saying it's not going to happen. So I'll be left behind to do penance. So I'll be here one way or another.
Thank you, Chris. Josh, it's good to see you.
Good to see you guys.
Good to be with you guys.